uh, I wanted to get you guys starting some texture painting, right? We kind of did baking last time, right? We showed how text tools makes baking a normal map quite easy, particularly if we had the simple multi-resolution models there, right? But remember, we have these workspaces up here, right? So this workspace up here is called Texture Paint. And you'll see it gives us a lot of our core painting tools, particularly 8. Remember, this is a quick key we had on our quiz recently, 8 for Texture Paint, right? So even when you're in Texture Paint workspace, if you don't hit 8, you're not going to get the Texture Paint mode, right? So remember, 8 is Texture Paint mode. And you see there's Paintbrush, right? There's Soften, there's Smear, there's a Clone Brush, there's a Fill Bucket. You can work with mask painting. There's even technically Annotate brushes, right? So you have some core brushes right there. All the strokes work with this, right? This is where, at some point, I would recommend, if you guys really are going to get serious about texture painting in Blender, I just spend the money on B-Painter. It's like $39 or something like that on Blender Market. B-Painter is awesome. It gives you more brush presets. It gives you the ability to save your own presets really easily. It gives you a nice browser for textures. And it gives you a layer system that actually works fairly well. So I have B-Painter at home that makes my texture life even easier. But B-Painter really is mostly just what Blender already does, and it's just got a nice interface for it, right? So all these are still to work the same. All of those work the same we did for our sculpting. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 4 for object mode, select the body. I'm going to turn off quad gear for now because I really just want to focus on starting to get you guys to paint the body here. All right. So now we've got the body going. Now, in this case, we do need to create a new texture for this body, right? So remember, if you go to the kind of red sphere here, right? It's like that magenta sphere. Of course, you can do this in the shading window as well. So if you want to go to shading and, create a texture node like we did last time, right? Remember, you can always go to add texture, image texture. That just drops in a node here, and you can just create a new one, plug it into base color. So you can always do this in the shader tree. But sometimes it's kind of overkill, right? The shader tree in Blender is nice and easy to use, but you don't always need to use it for that stuff. So if you're in Texture Paint workspace, remember you can always go to the red sphere, and this brings up your material stuff. And you'll see it's quad body here. So you have your browser stuff for your materials there as well, and quad body is what we want here. And you'll see that we have all of these base areas here for properties, right? If we want to do some metallic and shininess, we can play with metallic, specular, roughness. We'll see a little later on that you can play with transmission and alpha to get transparency maps, right? Emission is for our glow stuff. And of course, you can see some stuff's plugged into normal map. But at the very top is base color. That is where you plug in your color map, is base color. Now, the cool thing about really all software, because everything we're learning in Blender is actually basically the same in other software. Blender's just got a pretty great workflow and interface around it, right? But remember, you can just click on the color, and you can actually change the color of the material itself without actually, changing or creating a texture map. So remember, these colors can actually be used without textures. In this case, though, you'll see that this is really for the whole object. So kind of fine for a monitor or a PC tower or a car, right? Because on our car, we really just, base color, turned some metallic up, played some roughness and some clear coat. And then we're like, cool, that's a pretty good car material, right? But in this case, we really want some different colors on different areas of the model. And we want to be able to control that at the level of the pixel, right? And that's what texture maps allow you to do, is control these material properties, really, at the level of pixels, right? So you create a texture map and you plug it into a material channel so that you can control it at that fine level of pixels instead of it being kind of a global thing for the whole object. So if I click on the yellow dot, right, because these little dots right here in front are how you plug in an input. So I click on that, and you see it brings up these options, and you can see that there's your image texture control there. So you're always kind of looking for that image texture node, right? And there we go, and that plugs that in. And you can open one if you already have an existing one, right? But you can also just create a new one, right? So we can go to new, and I can give this a title, so we can call this quad body color. And I want it to be a higher resolution than 1024. Now, generally at home on my machines, I work with like 4096s all the time. I've been going with 2048s here, not because this computer couldn't handle 4096s, but I realize a lot of you guys might run into some issues with your devices this year, right? Hopefully next year with newer computers and everybody back on regular computers will have more flexibility. But I figure we're going to go with 2048s just to keep it a little bit more reasonable for you guys. So 2048 by 2048, that's the 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. We give it a name. Blank's fine. If you wanted to have a higher quality texture that'll have less banding, it'll look smoother as it transitions between colors, you can tell it to be 32-bit floating point. However, that is going to be a bigger file size. So I think we're just going to keep the default, which I think is 8-bit in Blender. And they'll look pretty good, right? You might see a little bit of banding or like a not quite as smooth a transition of colors, but you have to get close to really notice that. So if you do want 32-bit, it is right there. It is available. It does come with a bigger file size, though, because there's more information in the texture to make it smoother and cleaner. But standard 8-bit textures, honestly, and a lot of pipelines, unless you get super close, hold up fairly well. But if you want that higher quality, it's there. But like I said, I feel like with your guys' devices, it might be, recipe for disaster. So we'll hit OK. And we now have a texture actually plugged into the color space here. In fact, if you go to shading, you'll now see it, right? You'll see there's actually a color map right here, right there, plugged in. So there we go, right? We got it plugged into the base color. If you really wanted to make sure to tell it to go to the proper UVs, it's usually fine. It'll know which UVs to go to. But there is actually nodes. I'm trying to remember where it's at. I think it's somewhere in here. I'm trying to remember where that's at. I usually don't need to use it. I use bpainter. Here we go. Input, you can actually use a UV map to plug in between or plug into vector to kind of give you full control over the UVs, but shouldn't be a problem for this guy. But you'll see that there is the color map plugged in there. We can go back to texture painting. And one of the things we'll see is that, of course, we have a UV editor here, right? So in texture paint, just like UV editor, we have our UVs here and then our model here. You can paint two-dimensionally in Blender, right? So we're not probably going to need that much in this one, and I'm just going to do a couple of things here really quick just to show you some tools and get us started so we have a map created for it. But basically, you can always paint in the 2D space as well as the 3D space pretty seamlessly, right? And all your tools will work in here. Stencils will work in here and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the fill bucket here, right? And make sure you're in texture paint workspace that paint is turned on here, right? Sometimes it's set to view. So make sure paint is on in the UV space here. Grab fill bucket, right? Fill bucket's on. And I can go to a color up here, and I'm going to pick kind of maybe kind of a darker green for this rhino. Because he's a weird space alien rhino. Doesn't have to be gray, right? So I can just go in here and I can pick a color, adjust the lightness or darkness of it as well as the color itself. And I like to fill bucket the whole texture instead of just the polygons. So I often, when I first start off and I want to really get my color for this texture, I will tend to go to fill bucket in the 2D space, make sure paint's on, and pick this. And we can go fill bucket, and there's our green. Now the cool thing is if I think that's still a little too bright, I can go and I could turn the value down a little more and fill bucket again, and there we go, a little bit better. All right, and now we can see we've got some color there. Now you'll notice that this image is right here, and so what we can do is, of course, we go save as, and you'll see that it's actually right there, say quad body color, PNG, so I'll save as. There we go. And of course, if you go to File, External Data, we showed this the other day, you could check on Automatically Pack in a Blender file. And then when I save, it'll save and even save this texture inside of that. So you can move the Blender file around. Now, I'm not going to get to quite do, I'll do a little bit of painting maybe on the face here just to start it off. But one of the cool things you can also do in Blender, which I love, is I can go back to 2 for edge mode, right? 2 for edge mode. And what I could easily do is I could select this edge loop right here, right? And if we go to select menu, remember there is in select loops, select loop inner region. I actually use this enough at home that I've got a quickie set to it. What that does is that actually selects, that takes the edge loop, and it selects the polygons or edges on one side of that edge loop, and it picks the side with less. Neat feature. I wish Maya had that. I can go to 3 for face mode, and if I go back to 8, right? 8 for texture paint, right? You see this little box right next to texture paint that looks like a polygon? If you click on that, paint mask is now on. And with that fill bucket, I could actually go up here and pick a color that's much more like a grayish green. And you can actually fill bucket just on that selection of polygons. So this actually allows you to have a paint mask based on selection. That is cool, isn't that? Love that. Then, of course, we go back to our regular paintbrush here. If you need to also, you can always click in here. If you go here, you can kind of click on that, and you'll see there's an eyedropper here. So you can always eyedrop that, right? So if you click on this color, there's an eyedropper. So you can sample that color. I'm going to go to fall off. I usually like fall off to be smoother, so it's got a better fall off at the edges. And you see what I could do is I could go in here, and that was sampling, unfortunately, let's see here. You might want to make sure to sample from here to get it a proper darker color. There we go. Oh man, that's still not sampling the proper color. I'm trying to remember how. One BPainter makes this stuff easier for me. There's a feature in here. I'm just trying to remember where it's at. Man, what was it? I think it's... Is it world space lighting? No, I don't think that's going to be the case for us here. Although that is good for you guys to have on. World space lighting kind of keeps it darker on one side, but if you have that off, see how it kind of keeps it even everywhere? I'm trying to remember where the feature was, because there's a feature that allows us to... they added it recently. It was... I want to say it was a matte cap feature. I'm trying to remember where it was, though. But if you go to flat, you can always go here and sample that color. There we go. So you can actually kind of just have those set up so that this is set to flat, and then you can kind of go back and forth, and that'll give you the proper color. BPainter actually has its own quick key for color sample that actually does all that for you. So like I said, BPainter is really awesome, and it helps to give a little bit extra oomph to the texture painting tools. But if you go to this shading mode and you set it to be flat instead, it just shows you exactly the color. And that way you can properly sample all these colors that you want for that stuff. And then kind of go back. And you see we can just kind of paint in and out just kind of the basic colors we want to have on this model. And that's really kind of how this starts to work and how we could set up and start to texture paint. I'm going to go to the, and we'll do a little more color painting with this next week. But keep in mind that I'm a little spoiled by BPainter. But remember, you do have different shading models, and you might want to, when you're doing painting, just have this one set up for flat. And that would be an easy way to kind of just do quick, proper sample colors of the actual color, and not the color affected by lighting, right? Because that's what was happening, is the sampling was affecting that. I feel like there's another feature for that they added, and like a matte cap or something like that. I'm just trying to think of it off the top of my head right now, but I can't. But remember, fill masks, fill bucket are great. And of course, this material's for the quad body, so I can go down and I could turn specular down, and I could turn roughness up, and we can make our shininess a lot more subtle on our quadruped. Because you're going to have a little bit of shininess for skin, but it's not going to be a lot, right? That was just too pronounced. So remember, specular can be turned up or down. and roughness can be turned up to kind of spread it over the surface more. And now you can start to see that we can fill in some colors here. And I'll save that image there as well. There we go. And I think that'll be a great place to stop. I went a little longer than I thought, but I want to get you guys a good start for it.